Hello and welcome to the Plant School podcast. I'm Rachel Tenney, and here we learn all about plants, how they work, how to care for them, and it's all taught in a way that anyone, from beginner to expert, can listen to, understand, and enjoy. So I hope that you will join me in Plant School. Hello and welcome to the Plant School podcast. Today is one of those episodes that is just more fun and lighthearted. I hope you guys really enjoy it. Before I get into this Reddit post that I'm going to be looking over, I of course want to do our giveaway winners. So if you're new here, this is how the giveaways work. Every single episode, I do a giveaway and I choose two people. One person is someone who has left a review on Apple Podcasts, and the other one is someone who has commented on Spotify. I do it this way since Apple Podcasts and Spotify are the two main platforms that I know you as listeners are on. So let's go ahead and start with Spotify. Last week's episode was so good. It was all about bonsais. I hope you guys were able to listen to it. And I asked you guys, do you own a bonsai? And the winner today, they responded. Their username is Ponyboy. They said, I got a bonsai juniper at the start of this year. I forgot about it behind a curtain for a month. I'm assuming the bonsai's not doing so well, but Ponyboy, if that was you, go ahead and email tennyplants@gmail.com. That's TENNEY plants. I'll get your address and we will get that giveaway package sent your way. And then moving over to Apple Podcasts, someone who has left a review over there, their username is Bree2214. And they said, I'm new to my plant journey and recently started listening to this podcast and have learned so much about the plants I have gotten. I love how in-depth the care guides are. Thank you so much, Bree, for that very kind review. If you could email me at tennyplants@gmail.com as well, I will get that giveaway package on its way to you. And I forgot to mention this at the beginning, but what you win as a giveaway winner is a bottle of Prop Drops from Market Botany. Prop Drops are a propagation aid for water. So you drop it in and it really helps all your plants that you're propagating in water really take off. I use it. I love it. I hope you guys love it too, all you past giveaway winners. If you'd like to check it out, you can go to marketbotany.com. You can even use code Plant School Podcast and that'll give you a discount. And if you want to win next episode's giveaway, episodes come out every other week, because I am a busy mom of 4 children. But if you would like to win, go ahead and leave a comment on Spotify. It can be anything. Usually I'll ask a question. So since this episode is related, to the worst plant advice, I want to hear your worst plant advice that you've ever received, or if you've heard any of the same ones that I'm going to look through and read off in this episode. Or if you are listening on Apple Podcasts and you would like to enter in the giveaway, feel free to leave a review over there. Okay, so let's dive into this Reddit post. I haven't gone through and read any of it yet, so this is all new for me too, and I really hope there's some unhinged stuff in this thing. So this is how it started. The original poster said, "Buckle up, lads, it's time for a game of what is the worst plant care advice you have ever received?" And so they started with their own story, and this is what they said. As always, I will start with a charming and witty anecdote from my days as an unseasoned plant parent. Feel free to comment with your own traumatic experiences. One night, in a caffeine-induced fit of panic, I called my mother seeking sage advice for my besieged houseplants, suffering from a case of the pest we all know and love, spider mites. Now, for those of you who have never had an encounter with these little freaks, watching a plant succumb to the damage inflicted by their presence essentially feels like being sent to prison for a crime you didn't commit. And in her groggy wisdom, my dear mother solemnly declared, "Coat them in mayonnaise. It worked wonders when you had lice as a child." Oh no. Oh. They continue, and I stared at my verdant companions, questioning the botanical logic of this mayo-induced remedy. I wondered to myself, did my Majesty Palm dream of becoming a sandwich? Did my succulents secretly long for a mayo massage? I was hesitant to follow her peculiar advice and convert my living room into a bizarre condiment-themed spa, but what choice was there? Answer, literally every other home remedy on the internet. And as I found myself on the brink of mayo slathering madness, I couldn't help but marvel at the absurdity of it all. I pondered the cosmic connection between lice-infested childhoods and arachnid-ridden houseplants, including that perhaps my mom's methods transcended conventional wisdom. And as the deed was yet to be done, I stood there, mayo in hand, marveling at this bellowing reminder that in the grand theater of plant care, the aesthetic prowess wielded by mayonnaise was mightier than the nuanced knowledge of the trade. Like a high-stakes poker game where the ante is the jar of mayo and the bluff is a well-coated fern. That was so well written. What a great story. And it sounds like they ended up deciding not to use the mayonnaise. Thank heavens. You want to know something? When I was starting out my houseplant journey, I looked up how to make your plants shine, like DIY remedies, and mayonnaise was one of the things that people suggested again and again. I actually tried it on my lemon lime dracaena, and I made this whole video about it on my YouTube channel because it didn't end well. I feel like it did affect my lemon lime dracaena. There seemed to be these brown speckled dots on the leaves that I ended up using mayonnaise on. So yeah, it's definitely not something I would ever recommend. I'm not sure why someone thought it would be a good idea because it does clog up your plant's stomatas. Stomatas are those little breathing holes where the exchange of gas is happening, and you clogging those up really affects the plant. It can't release its oxygen. It can't take in the carbon dioxide. It's a mess. Okay, the next comment on here, and it has a whole lot of upvotes, meaning people really like this one. Someone said, ice cubes for orchids is some of the worst advice out there. This one's really interesting to me because we just covered orchids very recently. I think it was like 2 episodes ago. And we actually learned that there's that study out there from the University of Georgia and Ohio State University where they looked at using ice cubes on orchids versus just traditional watering with like room temperature water. And they found that there were no adverse effects from the ice cubes. It was literally the same. So either one works just fine. So it's so interesting that someone said that. And this post is kind of old. It was written, let's see, it looks like this was an active post about 2 years ago. So perhaps this study hadn't come out yet. But now we know that ice cubes for orchids actually is not as bad as it seems. Yeah, in my opinion, I think it's kind of silly. It's not how the plant is watered out in its native environment. And to keep a houseplant happy, sometimes you're just trying to mimic that native environment. So ice cubes seem really off-putting, at least to me. But the science shows that the orchid literally will do just fine either way. It doesn't matter as much as we thought it did. Okay, the next person, they said, the craziest thing I've ever heard was using milk as fertilizer. And someone said, I've heard that too, using milk with water, something about the lactic acid. And then someone said, I've heard the same thing. It hasn't hurt my plants yet. And then they said, I also pour leftover beer on my plants. I used to work as a server at a brewery. After dropping off trays of beer, there was always a bit of spilled beer on our tray. Every server, upon walking back into the building, would dump the tray into a potted plant that was right in front of the door. That plant got huge. That's so interesting. Someone said diluted milk is a great way to prevent blossom end rot when growing tomatoes. They said that their source was a friend who was a tomato farmer in Guatemala. Someone said, I tried this a couple of times and all I got was the most foul-smelling pots ever. I imagine if you don't dilute it, you would get that. You would get those foul-smelling pots and it would be disgusting. Just imagining that spoiled milk smell in your pots, that would be awful. But let's look it up. Is lactic acid good for plants? Okay, according to Rogue Soil, Bokashi Earthworks, and ScienceDirect.com, it's not the lactic acid itself, but it's the bacteria that produce the lactic acid. They break down organic matter, enhance soil structure, which can help your water and air circulation, and it can keep away harmful pathogens. But then they go on to say that you can add it to your soil using something like Bokashi bran or homemade lactic acid bacteria cultures from fermented ingredients. Nothing about using milk on your houseplants, although, one moment, there is a post on Facebook about how to make LAB or lactic acid bacteria and how your garden will love it. So how they make it is they use rice wash water. So like when you rinse off your rice before you stick it in your rice cooker or whatever, so you get that starchy water and you leave it in a loosely covered jar for 2 to 3 days until it starts to smell slightly sour. Sounds lovely. Okay, and then you add some milk to it, about a 1-to-10 ratio. Then you let that all sit for 5 to 7 days, and you're gonna see 3 layers. The top is curds, the middle will have your LAB-rich serum, and the bottom is solid. So then they say you can harvest the middle layer, which will be a yellowish liquid, store it in a jar in the fridge, and add it to your water when you are watering your garden. They say use 1 to 2 tablespoons in about 1 gallon of water. So it's very diluted. That's so interesting. And they say at the beginning of this post that it's a Korean natural farming method. I honestly have never heard of this, but when it comes to gardening, I'll be honest, I feel like I have so much to learn. I've only been gardening for a few years, and every year I just feel like I know nothing, but it's fun. We're learning, and I'm not sure if I'm gonna include the lactic acid bacteria and curdle some milk and rice water, but it is an option. That's so interesting. So it sounds like this advice of using milk as a fertilizer is actually not the worst idea out there, but just be sure to dilute it. Maybe you could make your own culture of the lactic acid bacteria, but definitely don't dump milk straight up into your houseplants. And also with houseplants, I feel like because it is such a small area, like it's just that pot of soil, things can go south really quickly. Whereas in a garden, you have lots of soil. You have open, fresh air circulating around. So sometimes I feel like gardening advice gets taken and used for houseplants, and it doesn't always transfer very well. Perhaps this is one of those cases. But I also want to talk about the beer thing. That's so interesting, something I have never heard. But my dad, he would actually use beer in his fertilizer as well. It was like a spring wake-up mix for our grass, actually. And I remember it had beer in it because my family, we don't drink any alcohol. And so that was like the one time my dad would buy beer and it would just sit in our garage. I don't think any of my siblings ever tried it. I certainly didn't, but I knew that my dad would use it for our grass to kind of wake it up. And it wasn't just straight up beer. It was like a big emulsion of ingredients. I don't remember all of them, but I do remember the beer. Okay, another comment on here. They said, my mom used to give birth control and Diet Coke. I guess somehow it helped because they started calling her the plant doctor at work, and people would give her their dying plants to save. I'm not sure what the birth control would do, but someone commented that they poured their White Claw in their calathea, and now it's flowering like crazy, and they even included a picture with their calathea and all these little white flowers that are popping out. So when I do a quick search on like the effect of caffeine on plants, it says that it can stimulate germination of seeds, it can increase root growth and repel some pests, but it could also cause stunted growth, alter the soil pH, and cause leaf discoloration, wilting, or even death in some plants. I'm not sure what exactly is at play with houseplants and soda. To me, it sounds like a bad idea with all of that sugar in soda and in your energy drinks. I wonder if I look up, can caffeine cause flowering in plants? All right, it looks like, according to some of these top websites, caffeine does not directly cause plants to flower. But then someone on Facebook, man, we're ending up in these Facebook posts and they're just blowing my mind. Someone says they put coffee grounds into their soil and they've had crazy blooms on their hydrangeas. But that doesn't necessarily mean it's the caffeine in the coffee causing that. I'm not seeing anything that talks about caffeine helping flowering. I think it might have just been a fluke that this lady, the plants did well when she stuck in Diet Coke, and for this guy who dumped in his White Claw for it to have flowered right after. It's funny because their username is Calathea Murderer. That might have been what happened eventually to this Calathea. Oh, and continuing on this thread, I knew it would get here. This is still the thread originally tied to the milk post because someone commented and said, I've used breast milk for plants. It works. The plant grew like a beast. And they said that they used it from their excess frozen breast milk and it needed to be thrown away, but instead they decided to use it on their ZZ plant and the ZZ plant just exploded in growth. Again, it probably goes back to the lab, the lactic acid bacteria helping out. I think we're getting into the territory of that podcast episode I did about different ways to fertilize, like using your pee or your period blood. And I think when it comes to using bodily fluids, one, I feel like it does gross a lot of people out. Yes, there are nutrients in our bodily fluids that we are getting rid of. And if you dilute it, I'm sure there are benefits to it. But I think there's a huge hurdle for people to use things like this just because of the ick factor. No one wants to be looking at your houseplant and know that you use breast milk to fertilize it. I'm sorry, people just don't want to think about that. Okay, let's move on to a different comment. We're getting more people saying they were recommended to use mayonnaise on their plants. The OP or the original poster commented and said, I thought it was just the disjointed ramblings of a madwoman, aka my beloved mother, who thought this, but apparently other people think this too. Someone commented and said, I posted on this subreddit, which the subreddit we're on is houseplants, and I was asking about my peace lily and was directed to put it in the darkest room I had. It was my first plant, the plant died, LOL. Yeah, that is awful advice. We all know that those plants that are marketed as being low light plants does not mean no light. And honestly, they do so much better if you give them bright indirect sunlight. Like your snake plants, your ZZ plants, your peace lilies, even your pothos plants. If you give them that bright indirect sun, they will do so much better than if they are in low light. Okay, this person, their name is Busty McCoo. They said, the bad advice was concocted and executed all by myself. Word to the wise. Don't spray your gnat-infested plants with citronella essential oil unless you want all the leaves to all melt off. Oh, that is so sad but so hilarious. Word to the wise, just don't use essential oils unless they are super, super diluted on your houseplants. I understand the thought process of using citronella, it repels mosquitoes, so it could repel your fungus gnats. But if you are diluting that thing, yeah, your leaves will melt off. All right, next person, Friendly Chemical. They said, the most horrifying advice I ever got was someone recommending to me to water my dying monstera with period blood. Oh, I knew we'd get here. Okay, here we go. Because it has a lot of nutrients. I feel like that info is correct because they had a lot of very beautiful, healthy plants. But I would rather pass away before I get period blood-based fungus gnats. I was also told that I would pass away in my sleep because all of the plants in my room would start converting oxygen to CO2 when it's night. So they would suck the oxygen out of my room so hard there wouldn't be enough left for me. Whoa, whoa, whoa. Okay, first thing, the period blood. We've talked about that. There are nutrients in our blood. Is it good for plants? Yes, in some degree it is. Blood meal is a very common fertilizer for plants. Usually it is recycled from something like a slaughterhouse or thing like that where they have excess blood that can be dried and used as fertilizer. I know it's kind of weird to think about, but I think it's great that we are recycling that. As far as using our period blood, there is a problem of not just blood is being, excreted during that monthly time. And you don't need those extra things. So you need to strain that, that just sounds messy. It just sounds messy. I think it is more work than it is worth. If you want to do it, go for it. More power to you. Just don't tell me about it. Just keep it to your happy little self. Okay, the next thing, plants converting oxygen to CO2 at night and sucking the oxygen out of the room. That is honestly hilarious that someone would think that. That reminds me of I had a friend, it was like a friend of a roommate, who thought that if she farted, she could sniff up the smell of her fart and it would be gone from the room. Like she could inhale all of it and problem was solved, no smell from her fart. Which is just like wild and so silly, but that is what this is reminding me of. Sorry, we are having a lot of like body talk on this episode. I apologize. Okay, but for real though, we do know that plants, they photosynthesize during the day, and at nighttime when there is no light, they go through a process called respiration, cellular respiration, and it fuels their metabolic functions, keep them going. They are consuming oxygen and releasing carbon dioxide, but just know that it is in such a small quantity, much smaller than in the daytime when it is releasing that oxygen into the air. So, of course, it's not something you should ever be worried about. But that is hilarious to me that someone said that it would suck up all the air out of your room and you would just asphyxiate. That is ridiculous. All right, next comment. Fuzzy Blueberry said raw egg in soil as a fertilizer. Safe to say, the egg didn't fertilize anything. A lot of bugs got quite festive on the plant, though. An excellent party. Oh, that's a good pun. It's a good pun. And then someone commented, said maybe they understood this wrong. People use crushed eggshells in the soil. I don't know if that works, though. Someone said if you grind them up finely, they can add calcium to the soil. Oh, and Fuzzy Blueberry did comment back. They said no, egg yolk and the egg whites, the whole raw deal. That is so interesting. I know gardeners have sometimes inserted like an entire egg into their soil, like they haven't broken it, and it can kind of act as a slow release fertilizer of sorts. I'm not sure how well that works, but to do it on houseplants, that just seems like such a bad idea, especially just like the whole raw egg into that small of a pot. Yeah, it would be an absolute mess. And then grinding up eggshells to add calcium to the soil. I've heard that has a very minimal effect on the calcium that your plant can get because it's in a form that is not readily available for the plant. And also, your plants don't need a whole lot of calcium to begin with. All right, let's move on. This person said, today my uncle told my grandma the orchid he bought her never needs to be watered, and that if you keep it near the sink, it'll soak up water vapor. Oh my gosh, this is awful advice. And again, we just covered orchids 2 episodes ago. We know this absolutely is not true, unless it was a fake orchid. That's the only way. If it was plastic, sure, it'll make it because it's plastic. But otherwise, your orchids are going to need a good soak with some good drainage. It does not have the ability to sustain itself off of water vapor from your sink. All right, next person, Duke the Unicorn, said leftover pasta water for houseplants. First of all, what kind of bland, underseasoned cookery do you inflict on people? And second, thanks for the moldy soil. Someone else commented, said, exactly, I've heard this from a few people that cooled pasta water is good for plants, but only if it's unsalted. And I'm like, who doesn't salt their pasta water? Uh-oh, I don't salt my pasta water. I'm confused. Why do you need to salt your pasta water? I always salt my pasta dishes after it's done. And usually I'm like salting and changing the sauce, not my pasta. Feeling a little attacked here because I definitely don't salt my pasta water. But that's interesting that they got moldy soil. I feel like that starchy water could be fine. It could offer some minimal amount of nutrients to your houseplant soil. Perhaps you need to dilute it with some more water, and maybe they didn't dilute it and that's the reason for the moldy soil. But I think it's going back to those people making the lactic acid bacteria serum with the rice water, that starchy water. I feel like you could use pasta water as well and then add milk to your pasta water and do it that way. But that's interesting. Let's move on to the next one. Chewed Up by Life says they got some advice to piss in my houseplants because the nitrogen would be good for them. I responded with, I'll leave that to my cats, but thanks, I guess. And then someone commented, they're like, dang, for real? Oh well, zips pants back up. Oh, that's too good. It definitely don't pee on your houseplants straight up. But I know I sound crazy. If you dilute your pea water, it is a big boost of nitrogen for them. Keyword though, dilute it. You can't just tinkle on your plants. They will get nitrogen burn and they will die. That is why you get burns in your grass when a dog pees in it. It's because it is too much nitrogen all in one spot and it's a burn on your grass. If you watered it down or if you went out with a hose to that spot that the dog just peed on, you could remedy that way. All right, next person, they said, the worst advice I got was to stick to a watering schedule. When I was a newbie, my plants died of thirst or root rot. Also, I'm sure I gave some bad advice on this subreddit as well, and I'm sorry. You keep a few pothos alive and suddenly you feel like an expert. Oops. That's so true. We all live and we all learn, you know? But I agree with this person. Watering schedules aren't all that helpful. You gotta feel the soil. If it's dry, it needs water. If it's moist or wet, don't water it. That saves you so much trouble. Okay, next comment. This person said the worst advice I ever received and put into practice was to never, ever, under any circumstance, water my plants at night. Never. Why? Because that's when plants breathe. For some reason, I took that at face value without looking into it any deeper. Unfortunately, it was during the first year I was really into plants and had a growing collection. So I had a lot of plants that suffered needlessly, and it was actually Plantarina in a YouTube video that helped me let go of this very bad advice. She stated that she watered whenever she had time or remembered, and her plants were doing just fine. And then they included a link for anyone that wanted any more information on plants breathing. That probably has to do with what we talked about, how they photosynthesize in the day and they respirate at night. They release oxygen. I don't think watering your houseplants could affect that in any way. I do trust Plantarina. That lady has, a whole business around houseplants, and I think she knows what she's talking about. And I definitely agree. You water them when you have time. All right, next person, they said, throwing dead bugs into Venus flytraps. Went about as well as you'd expect. Those leaves did shut and then died. I could have thrown a rock in there for all it mattered. Also, planting them in garden soil and killing them with well water, ensuring a quick demise. And they go on and say, not houseplant related, but I remember the day I looked up proper tree care, and one of the first questions I asked myself after reading the introduction was, what is a root flare? And then I realized that over the last decades, my parents were killing most of their trees and shrubs slowly by getting their roots to girdle and choke out the trunk. The apricots that we planted never fruited and dried out after a while. What a mystery. I remember when I was a child, my mom keeping her first and last bonsai indoors all the time. Nobody looked up how to properly care for it. Another 50 pounds down the drain. I remember my mom being sad and planting the half-dead tree in the backyard. We were told that if left to their own devices, they would become a regular tree, and it did. It turned into a regular-looking dead tree, but at least it left behind a funny-looking vase and a dead tree in the yard until I broke it into a million pieces accidentally. They stopped there. I wonder what the story was with breaking that bonsai. Sounds like there was a lot of ill-informed choices going on throughout their whole upbringing. It's interesting because putting bugs into Venus flytraps, it does provide them with a source of nutrition, but I think those traps, they only close for a few times in their lifetime. So if you are making them do it too often, if you're poking them, with a little toothpick just for kicks and giggles, the trap will eventually fall off and die much quicker than you think. But yeah, garden soil for a Venus flytraps, oh, that's a bad idea. Those guys need very airy, mossy soil because Venus flytraps are native to, I believe it's North Carolina, and very marshy, boggy soil. But yeah, there was a lot to that post. Let's move to the next one. They said, more funny than terrible, but I've seen a few sources recommend feeding Venus flytraps and other carnivorous plants cheese. Yes, I have tried it. No, they did not appreciate it. I thought this was going to be another dead bug one, and I was so surprised when I saw cheese. That is crazy. I just want to know the origin of these stories. Who thought to themselves, if I stick a little bit of cheese into this Venus flytrap, or or this pitcher plant, I think you would like it. I think it would go well. It's just such a wild idea to me. Cheese versus a bug, I don't see very many nutritional similarities there. All right, next one. Let's do a few more. This person said the facilities guy at my work walked by while I was watering my office plants at the water fountain in the hall, and he said, "Put a teaspoon of sugar on top of that soil, and your plants will grow overnight." I just had to smile and nod and say thank you. And then someone else said, "Watching my houseplants become addicted to sugar just like their owner is? No thanks, lol." Yeah, definitely plants will not need sugar added to their soil. All right, this person said the worst plant advice I've gotten is from my in-laws. According to my mother-in-law, I should just keep all my houseplants outside and never bring them in. She is growing in zone 10. I am in 7A. My orchids and tender succulents and pothos and other houseplants would not survive here year-round. My father-in-law says that instead of watering plants well and letting them dry out between waterings, I should water just a little bit every single day. He's given me this advice for everything from native flowers to tomato plants to orchids to succulents. And the runner-up for worst advice is the multiple people who have told me to put ice cubes in my orchids. Oh, there we go, the ice cube thing. That was totally me. And thinking that was an awful idea, but we learned that it's not. Okay, let's go back to our first one. Keeping your houseplants outside all year round, definitely something you could do in Zone 10. All you people out in Florida, or maybe like some parts of Southern California, I am so jealous that you can keep houseplants outside for long periods of time, if not the whole year. I am in Zone 6B, something like that, so pretty similar to 7A. Definitely gets very cold in the winter, and no houseplant would survive. If my garden can't survive winters here, my houseplants are toast. They're not going to make it. And then watering a little bit every single day, that honestly just sounds exhausting. Like, I'm sure you could do it and they would be just fine, but it sounds absolutely exhausting. And I don't know if it's any better than just doing, like a drench watering every week or every 2 weeks. Okay, someone said the elderly lady checking me out at the Home Depot when I was swooping discount annuals at the end of spring swore by pouring used motor oil on any fruiting plant. I didn't have the heart to tell her about all the awful carcinogen she's been eating over the years. Oh my word, yeah, motor oil, I gotta say no, don't do it. Next person, curious student, said, watering an orchid with pool water. What? Yeah, that one I don't think is a good idea because of the chlorine. Pool water might be okay with all that pee, like we talked about, but no, for real, I don't think it would be a good idea because of the chlorine and the pool cleaners, all that sort of stuff in the water. All right, let's do our last one. These are just so fun. I just don't want to stop. Okay, so someone said, my stepfather is convinced that using soil from the yard is fine and safe. He had a peace lily that he was in charge of and insisted on transplanting it in dirt from the yard, which, by the way, is heavy with clay. That darn plant contracted crown rot, probably a combination of bacteria in the soil and the clay holding too much moisture, and it spread, oh no, to almost every plant in my house, including my amaryllis collection and my original 20-year-old amaryllis. I caught her in time somehow, and by some miracle she survived it and is still alive. But every other plant died a horrible slow death, and it took 2 full years to fully stamp out the infection. Every time I transplant something, he still insists that I should use soil from the yard. It takes everything in me not to slap him. He also insists I should water my potted plants with dirty, soapy dishwater. Apparently, that's what his father used to water his garden. Hard no. Oh my gosh, that is so sad about the father-in-law transplanting that peace lily and then it ended up killing her whole collection. That makes me so, so sad. Yet definitely soil from your yard, it's got bacteria they're not used to. And like she mentioned, it can be heavy with clay, it can be heavy with sand. And also there's tons of weed seed that is naturally in the soil outdoors, so I feel like you would transplant it in and then you would have weeds sprouting up along the sides of your houseplants. Just an awful idea. Just don't do it. And then the dirty, soapy dishwater. Soap is not great for houseplants to begin with. I think the little bits of, food could be just fine if it's diluted well enough. Wouldn't be a big deal, but I think the key here is his father used it in the garden, and with it being an outdoor environment, large amounts of soil, using your dirty dishwater would be fine. I also know that that is very common for people who live in deserts. For example, I have siblings that are in the Phoenix, Arizona desert, and they often use water from bath times. Like, their kids have finished bathing, they keep the water in there, and they take it out in buckets for their plants because they're trying to conserve water, save on their water bills, and it's just a way of being thrifty. And when it's an outdoor plant, sure. Indoor plants, though, can be much more sensitive. Anyways, there were some interesting comments in here going on, kind of like scanning through these. It's a lot of people talking about ice cubes on orchids, using crushed eggshells. A lot of Mayo people are in here as well. And a lot of people honestly just cheering for that very first story from the original poster and how great it was. I have to agree. It was a beautifully written story. Someone mentioned that a lot of these comments feel like the 5-minute craft videos. Oh, I agree. Those videos where they are, showing some ridiculous plant-related thing, they drive me insane. They are so bizarre and so untrue. Okay, wait, I found another one. Guys, I'm so sorry. There's another one here that I want to read to you. This person said some local plant Insta influencer, 330,000 followers, mind you, put sugar cubes into the soil. She also put slices of apple onto the soil, claiming the fruit will attract the bugs out of the soil and into the flesh of the fruit. I saw another one cleaning the leaves with olive oil. Again, olive oil could clog your stomatas. Maybe not the best idea. I have never heard of placing apple slices onto your soil and sugar cubes on your soil as well. Those are some interesting ideas. I am not too sure about them. Just on my gut instinct, I would say no, not the greatest idea. All right, I'm going to stop scrolling through all of these because then I keep just wanting to tell you about all of them. That is some awful advice to end on, which is right on par with what this whole episode was about. I hope you learned something new, even though these episodes are a little more lighthearted and fun. And I just want to say thank you for being here and for listening. And I hope that you will join me in 2 weeks for a brand new episode of the Plant School Podcast. Thank you so much for being here and for listening to the Plant School Podcast. I hope that you will join me for our next episode. And if you would like to support this podcast and keep it going, there's a link down in the show notes of this episode where you can donate to this podcast. And I really appreciate all that help. Or you can go to my merch store, which is also linked in the notes of this episode, and you can find some really cool plant-related shirts and stickers. And if you want to support the podcast but spend no money, feel free to share it with a friend, leave a review. All these things greatly help me out and allow me to keep doing this. Again, thank you so much for listening and for being here at the Plant School Podcast.